Hello, everyone. In this episode of ADE Spotlight Podcast, I had the pleasure of speaking with Mr. Dave Cruickshank. Mr. Cruickshank is an elected member of the Council of the Village of Holly, Michigan, a village which neighbors my hometown. Mr. Cruickshank was elected to the council in 2014 and so is more than halfway through his initial 4-year term. I first became acquainted with Dave when I attended a town hall he presided over, wherein he discussed the current laws regarding medical marijuana facilities and licensing in the state of Michigan and how it might impact on the village of Holly. I attended that town hall really just out of curiosity to see what I might learn and what the current legislative landscape was. And it was in that town hall I found Dave to be very well informed, certainly, very open, very willing to listen to criticism and address criticism, but at the same time being pretty firm in what his positions were. I learned quite a bit in that town hall, and I thought to myself that this would be a great topic for a podcast. I figured if I learned much from him, that some of the listeners to the podcast may learn some things as well. So I invited him on, and we talked about the current legislative environment as it regards to medical marijuana here in Michigan, and also other states and federal law. And we discussed, we got around to discussing legal recreational marijuana and the conversation revolving around that, and a number of other things. And I found Dave to be very, very engaging and, as I said, well informed. I think there are some things that we discussed that are really going to elicit some comments. I think there are going to be some things that listeners to the podcast will agree with and things that listeners to the podcast may disagree with. And I think that's the point of inviting people like Dave on. I enjoyed the conversation. I think you will too. And I hope to have Dave on a future podcast episode. Thank you for listening. Dave, I want to give you a little bit of background about why I was excited to have you on this podcast. As you know, I attended a town hall meeting you did several weeks ago in the village of Holly, Michigan, wherein you were discussing the legislation in Michigan relative to medical marijuana licensing and facilities and all of that. And, I knew by virtue of what we do here at ADE, I know about medical marijuana, but it was interesting to me the way you explained the various types of licenses that were available and the rules that went along with each license. I really didn't know it in that detail. And so I really appreciated that, you took the time to do that. And I thought this would be a great idea to invite you on, and so you can educate other people as well, just like you educated me. So I want to talk about that a little bit today, about starting with the basics. What is medical marijuana? It is legal here in the state of Michigan, but it's not legal in every state in the United States. And are the laws different in the state of Michigan versus some other places? And you may have some knowledge about that. And I also eventually maybe want to swing around to talk about legal recreational marijuana. And I think there's some interesting information coming out of some of the states that already have legal recreational marijuana, specifically Colorado. And I believe you referenced this, and I know that I had read this. One of the fears, as I understand it, about legal recreational marijuana was that states like Colorado the youth would have more access, and youth use of marijuana would go up. And my understanding is in Colorado that's not necessarily true. But on the other hand, maybe perceived risk of marijuana as a harmful substance is going down. And we are seeing that in the conversations we're having with our partners. So our partners around the country have varying opinions about medical marijuana and legal recreational marijuana, as I'm sure you've run into as well. So that's kind of the background for this conversation. But really, I think this would be a success if you could just sort of educate folks like you've educated me. I think you've done, as your role on the village council, I think you've done a lot of research. You clearly have a passion for this subject, and you were able to really communicate that. So let's start with just the basics. Let's talk about
Sure.
what is medical marijuana? What is the role of medical marijuana? And then how did the state of Michigan get involved in that?
Sure. Okay, so let's step back a little bit. So what we're talking about now in Michigan with medical marijuana is there's been a change in the law that was enacted in December of 2016. That law is not in effect yet, and it's supposed to go into effect December of this year in 2017. So that we all know that the Medical Marijuana Act was, passed overwhelmingly by the voters in 2008. That law, when it was passed, it was kind of, I wouldn't say at the start of the industry, because like Colorado, the western states kind of really started the trend in the early 2000s of passing the Medical Marijuana Acts in their own states. But, we're kind of on the leading edge, because as it stands right now, there's like 21 states that have some sort of a Medical Marijuana Act, and there's about 9 states currently that have recreational marijuana. So to define medical marijuana is, in a broad brushstroke, is still the same marijuana that you would either eat, ingest, smoke, or however you choose to do it. It's just you have a card now that makes it official that says you in air quotes, need this product. So there's not anything necessarily different. The only difference that there would be is that there are products that contain THC in them, which is the psychotropic portion of marijuana that actually gives you the euphoric feeling or being high or those kinds of things. And then there's a separate thing in marijuana called CBD, which is cannabinoids. That portion of the marijuana is what people are latching onto as far as medical reasons, because that does have medicinal qualities in it. And so much so that the government even has a patent on some of the cannabinoids, the CBD. CBD is, what you would find in edibles or candies, or you can even smoke a CBD, I think in like a vapor form, that gives you that, medicinal quality without giving you the high. So you may feel some sort of a euphoric feeling, but it's like nothing. It'd be almost like if you took like an opiate, like a Vicodin or Percocet or something along those lines. So that's where medical marijuana kind of stands today versus recreational. But in reality, it's kind of the same form. It's just like fishing, where you fish without a license, you're illegal. But now that you have a fishing license, you can fish what you want with the government's permission.
Oh, that's a great analogy. Is there a range of ailments that medical marijuana might be appropriate for?
Yeah, there's a lot that comes in there, but all the studies that when I've been researching is more along the lines of nerve damage related, injuries, and that goes from Parkinson's, MS, autoimmune diseases, and my wife actually has Crohn's disease. And what I've researched from that is CBD has a great effect on Crohn's, colitis, those kind of bowel related issues. And because there's a lot of cannabinoid receptors in the gut, so that has worked wonders from what I've read in research studies, and it's starting to come out with that. And I think the toughest part with all of it is, we're sort of in the gray area where studies are starting to come out, but it's super expensive to do them, especially since the federal government has, put marijuana as a Schedule I drug, which puts it on par with, cocaine and heroin and those serious hard drugs that have, high addictive qualities to them. And so for universities or science facilities that test this stuff, it's extremely expensive to test those. And I think, the government just actually reiterated that it would be a Schedule I drug just in the past 12 months. And that was a bummer for a lot of the science testing facilities, because they wanted to be able to start doing those testings on it.
I remember that there was some sense that with all of the momentum of the conversation about marijuana, that it might be moved from a Schedule I drug, but in fact, as you say, it wasn't. How many states did you say have legal medical marijuana now?
It was, the last I checked, it was 21. So it's like 21, 22, somewhere around there, but it's definitely over 20. I know that for sure.
And there are more states that are looking to do that?
Yeah, there's the ones that are kind of popping up now as I'm looking is Texas is one of the huge places that they're really pushing for it now. I believe Florida is in that realm as well. But, typically the liberal-leaning states are the ones that have already passed those rules. So California, Colorado, Oregon, Washington, and then over into the New England states as well, the New Hampshires, the Vermonts, and those kinds of things. And they've even started on, they've done with medical marijuana, so then they moved on to the recreational part of it, if only for the revenue, I would expect.
Yeah. That seems to be sort of a logical step. States that approve medical marijuana first and then to begin to discuss recreational marijuana, which maybe we'll come back to that. I want to stick with the medical marijuana for just a few more minutes, but
Sure.
So
Michigan, I guess. Sorry, just to kind of continue on that subject. I know it's popping in my mind. Michigan, we passed it in '08. That law was very gray, where there was not a lot of regulation or what could happen or how do you transport it. What happens with a dispensary? Is it only caregivers? So this update, I would say, is the best way to call it. That just passed last year. Is to give a lot more clarity to that because, those CBD oils or the edibles were not covered in there. In actuality, neither was a dispensary. So any dispensary that operates under Michigan today, as it stands, is illegal under the law. So when that law was passed, it was only through a caregiver. So you could only get it from a guy that's growing it personally, and you are his patient. So there has to be an established relationship there that you have to have a caregiver, and a caregiver has to have a patient in order to grow the plant. So this update to the law covers edibles. It covers transportation now. It covers dispensaries and those kinds of things. So this is, a lot more clarity to the original law, and then, allows for economic, activity to happen so that's out of the open, so that, towns can have economic growth by people purchasing buildings for doing any one of the 5 licenses that are now available, and then, allowing the individual to either have a caregiver or go to a dispensary.
When you say, Dave, the new law, you're talking about what was enacted in December of 2016?
Correct, yeah. It's called Act 281 is the law, and that was passed in December of 2016. And they put a 1-year hold on it because they're now bringing in the Michigan Licensing of Regulatory Affairs, the LARA board, that now regulates alcohol and those kinds of things to take over this and manage that. Because of all the licensing now that will go through, there's tons of fees for someone to get started. There's actually a pretty high barrier to entry for an individual if they wanted to, get involved in this new, market that's emerging.
One of the things I learned from you at your town hall was that there were, and again, you can correct me if I'm wrong because I may be, but 5 different types of licenses, and
Yes.
Individuals could not own multiple types of licenses.
Yeah, there's some language in the bill where they did not want, the entire pipeline to be owned by an individual. So, person A has a grow house, they have a testing facility, they have a transportation unit, and they have a dispensary. They wanted to have that kind of market competition. They wanted, the idea that anybody can necessarily get involved if they wanted to, and only in whatever license they wanted to. So one of the rules, like if you're a transporter, is a specific license, and you're literally just taking the raw product from a grower and either transporting it to a dispensary or a testing facility, but you cannot have either one of those licenses if you're a transporter. So they put those, regulations in place.
Just as a reminder, the 5 licenses are for growing, processing, transporting, dispensing, and I'm missing one.
Testing, so science facility testing, and that would be more along the lines of, testing the THC and CBD content in the plant, and giving the actual information, because the edibles and those kinds of things, they all have to be labeled with how much, sort of like a beer, the alcohol content, how much is in each one.
Right.
So that's what they would be doing.
So these are the 5 types of licenses, and there's,
correct.
Without getting too deep into the weeds here, no pun intended, but there's sort of regulations about who and how many of these licenses that you can have.
Well, not necessarily the ones that an individual. So if you wanted to open a grow house, you have the option of 3 different versions. There's a 500 plant, 1,000 plant, and 1,500 plant grow house. So you could pick one of those licenses, but there's no limit on to how many grows you can have. So, depending on the municipality, if they enacted 1 or 2 or 3, and you wanted to have all 3, and you were awarded all 3 from that municipality, that's not a problem. And then if there was another town where you wanted to do the same thing, you could potentially have, multiple grow houses in multiple municipalities. But, you're not allowed to own the dispensary on the other side of things either.
Okay, understood.
But some you can mix. I do want to be clear on that. There are, and I'm not sure which ones, but I know that transporter was called out specifically as not being, the gateway to A and B, that they wanted to keep that one separate. But I think you probably could own a, let's just say a science testing facility and then a grow house.
When I was doing a little bit of homework for this conversation, I ran across an article that was posted on mlive.com, which is for those that may not be familiar with it, it's a news source and kind of specific to Michigan news. And the headline of it that caught my attention was all-in-one medical marijuana facilities to be allowed under new rules. And is that something? Is that a revision to that 2016 law, or is that just sort of a rehash of this law that was passed in 2016? The fact that they would be able to do these things in the same physical location, is that something prior to
my understanding, they're not allowed to in the same place. So I'm going to plead naiveness to that I'm not 100% sure on that.
Yeah.
But as I understand it, you are not allowed to have those mix in the same, address or location. Yeah,
that's what I thought you had said in your town hall. At least that's what I took away from it. And so that's why this headline on MLive caught my attention. And this was, just late September, and I don't think there wasn't. It just says that the Lara board, which you mentioned, announced its intent to allow multiple licenses to operate out of one facility if there were certain conditions. So I guess that's something that's being
possible.
Considered.
There are some things that the Lara board that was created has only met a handful of times, and they have some things on their side of it that they need to button up before December. And that's where all of that stuff is coming out in the news now about, do they force dispensaries to close, reapply, and then open it back up, or will they get like a temporary, occupancy so that they can still operate and give care to the patients? And then go through the process, and if they're approved, obviously continue on, but if they're denied, then they'd have to shut down. So there's some of those things that they need to figure out on the Lara side of things, but most of the municipalities have 95% of all the data they need to make a decision today.
You brought up something there that I thought was interesting, that there are dispensaries in operation as we speak today that may be forced to close in December of 2017? Is that correct?
A lot of the individuals that I would follow on social media that are heavily involved with that, they're going to all these Lara meetings, and what's being discussed there is they want the dispensaries to close so that they can, get the process ironed out, so to speak, and then have the dispensaries open back up, which would probably be like a late spring. So we're talking your March, April time frame. But they want them to close by November 15th is what the rumbling is. I don't know if they've made an official decision on that yet, but that was the idea. And so a lot of individuals are up in arms because they only get their products from a dispensary now. So what are they going to do? Are they going to stock up and then violate another law because you're only allowed to have X amount of, raw marijuana or edibles on you? And then, do we go to caregivers, which caregivers now may not have enough product to supply to patients because obviously it takes a while to grow a plant, whichever plant you're talking about. And so they're unprepared. So it's really going to kind of upend the industry as it stands right now. But they are not in compliance with the current law that still exists, pre-December 2017.
Oh, okay. So you are a council member in the village of Holly, Michigan, which, for those listening to this podcast, I guess they need to know. The village of Holly is, I would say it's fairly small, maybe 2,000 people, 2,000 residents in the village.
The village actually has just over 6,000, so I think it's like 6,200. And then you include Holly Township, which has another 6,500-ish individuals. So when you talk about Holly, you can say 12 to 13,000 individuals at any given time.
So what does this all practically mean for a village like Holly, or really, I guess any municipality? We're talking. I guess now we're talking specifically about Michigan because of these Michigan laws. Mm-hmm. But what could this potentially mean for the village of Holly, either on the positive side or on the negative side?
Yeah. So the positives, I guess I could start with a little bit is most, if not every municipality that immediately surrounds us has passed on the ordinance. Which means the individuals that need that medicine now have to continue to get it from a caregiver or drive to the closest dispensaries I'm aware of is in Davison, and then from there you would go to Flint or Detroit or something like that. So a lot of people that have medical marijuana cards now. Some of them are for light chronic pain, but some of them are, terminal diseases where getting to the Rite Aid that's a half mile down the street is, a struggle and the only thing they can do that day. So when you ask them to take an hour round trip to Davison, 20 minutes there, 20 minutes in a shop and 20 minutes back, that literally wipes them out for multiple days on end. So those individuals, we're not giving them any relief. But that is something that I wanted to change and say, all this activity could happen in here. We could be an economic nucleus around the area because nobody else has decided to, take on these ordinances, so that we would have that economic activity for the locals to come in. And also, neighboring communities could come in and visit Holly, bring some information or, bring some, not much needed activity in the village. On top of that, the current law does not allow any of the municipalities to capture any of that revenue that goes on. So the new law does cover that, where there would be a 3% excise tax on top of the normal sales tax. So we're talking 9% total. So of that 3%, they do break it down where the municipality would get 20% of the 3%. And then it's broken down even further where that money is split up to the county that gets it for their police services. 20% I think goes to MSP, Michigan State Police, to explain that one, and then 5% I think goes just for updating the technology in some of the MSP Clemis system, I think is what they're using that for. So all of that 3% is already allocated. And it's in the bill, so it's not like, somebody had said before that, it's like the lottery where the money, kind of goes in one hand and comes out the other. It's all smoke and mirrors. This one is not. This is in the bill how the money is to be spent from that 3% excise tax.
Is it fair for me to say, Dave, that then you support this for compassionate reasons? In other words, you mentioned a terminally ill patient who it would be a hardship on them to have to go somewhere else to get these services. So there's compassionate reasons for this, as well as a positive economic boost for the village. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I'm definitely on the pro side of it, and I kind of take it from multiple angles. And every way that I look at it, I can't come up with a bad reason. My political beliefs. I'm a big opponent of the drug war, where we've spent literally over $1 trillion since Nixon enacted the drug war, and then here we are today, where we spent all this money and we actually have increased usage amongst all the individuals. So drugs are on the rise as a whole. Marijuana, being specific in there, is I truly believe that it is not something that has a detriment on society. And when you go back and even start researching why was marijuana illegal in the first place, and we're talking in the 30s after Prohibition was tried, failed, and repealed, they needed something to get that passed. And then, marijuana started kind of poking up because of the, immigration that was happening in the country at the time. And then it was made illegal for racist reasons. And that goes back to the reefer madness videos that everybody saw back in high school, where you turn into a psychotic individual, and all you want to go out is go out and try and rape individuals and commit crimes, and it's all this crazy ideas. And I truly believe that is not the case. I know plenty of individuals that smoke marijuana for medical reasons, plenty of individuals that smoke it for recreational reasons, and they are some of my best friends. They're business owners in town. They are family members, and it's just individuals off of the street that I know. In taking a lot of this discussion on, I've gotten tons of messages from individuals that say, hey, I'm for this. I can't publicly speak it because I'm a business owner and I don't want any retribution against me or from the negative stigma that still is out there. And so these people are not criminals. And that's the biggest thing. It's an individual that wants to do that and check out for a few hours, and instead of having 6 beers and going to bed, they may smoke a bowl or a joint or something along those lines and go to bed. In reality, they're good, law-abiding citizens, excellent family individuals, prioritize taking care of work and family as their first things, but you know what? That's their pleasure, and it's none of my business. That's kind of the biggest thing. And so even in a recreational standpoint, I would be pro-marijuana just because it's none of my business what you put in your body. I think that the states that pass that kind of stuff, like New York, where they have a soda ban, anything over X amount of ounces is, deemed illegal. So people just buy 2 smalls instead of a large. It doesn't, the prohibition just flat out does not work.
Let's let me ask you this, and maybe this is an unfair question, but if you are in favor of this, as I say, for compassion reasons and for economic reasons. But
yeah.
As I say, I attended the town hall, and I've had these conversations on a social level with just friends and people that I meet, and by virtue of my profession, I've had these conversations with professional people as well. And so, there are objections, and even in the town hall meeting that I attended, there were people who objected to this, and I'm sure you've heard these objections. Let's set aside the objections that are based on old mythology and stereotype and all of that. You're setting aside all of those. I'm going to, I guess, ask you to kind of look at this from a different angle. What are what you might even consider legitimate objections to medical marijuana, and specifically for a municipality to allow these facilities?
Sure. The one that's most common, and I actually, can agree with it, is it's hard to test somebody, in a roadside, pullover. How do the police know that someone is, currently either high or too high to drive? Blood alcohol content is easy. We figured that out. That's not a big deal. But how do we test someone, that's driving impaired? And I would certainly agree with that. But I think that the answer to that, too, is also that it's so expensive to do testing on marijuana because it's a Schedule I drug that we simply are not there yet. And even though we have those kinds of laws for drunk driving, it certainly has not eradicated drunk driving, right? So those individuals are still making those poor decisions, and half of them probably make it home that night because there was no police officer to pull them over. And that's part of the sad, things that go on today, and I would agree with that, but some of the other negatives is that, they think that there are people that think that if you have marijuana in your town that you are a dirty town, which is completely false. But, there may be some individuals that are looking for a place to live that they may not want to live in a place that has medical marijuana for its patients. That's, I would guess, still the reason that there may be like dry counties in Tennessee and Kentucky and the southern states that, they don't want alcohol in that town. And that's probably fine. That's, voluntary people saying together, we want to live by a certain set of rules, and this is the rules that we've enacted. But I think in town here, one thing to note is Holly in 2008 in that medical marijuana law, when it was on the ballot, the village itself overwhelmingly passed it by 72%, and that was in 2008. The township passed it. It was 66% approval. So I believe that the want or the stigma is getting broken down left and right, and there are certainly a few things that need to be ironed out, and I'm fully on board with all that. But I think that the problem, again, is the regulation surrounding it, that we're not allowed to actually do some serious studies by high-end universities that have a lot of credibility.
I think that's an excellent point. You mentioned also, I would imagine the objection, but you called it a dirty town. I think that's, sort of a perception problem, and people are concerned about their property values. I would imagine you would hear that concern quite a bit.
Yeah, property values is one of the things that came up, and so I started looking into that. And if you look in the states that have it now, Oregon, Colorado, Washington, property rates are actually high. They're actually going up. And especially in the business portions of it, because when they enact it, those either defunct buildings or open properties, because the entrepreneurs do stand to make quite a bit of money off of it, is that the properties actually do rise in there, the commercial properties. And then when you're talking about individuals that come in, you're talking about the Gen Xers, and the millennials who are starting to buy houses. They want to live in an open community like that, where there is the acceptance of medical marijuana and compassion for those users, that they do look at things like that.
You've clearly done your homework, Dave. Let's take this.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that.
As do I. Let me say that I clearly appreciate talking to somebody who is as well informed as you. It's great. But let's take this outside of the state of Michigan. In your homework, I know you're looking specifically at the village of Holly in the state of Michigan. But how do those laws in the state of Michigan compare with other states that you've seen as you've kind of investigated this? Are they similar? Are they similar laws in all of these states, or do they vary? And if they vary, how so?
The current state and the individuals I've talked to in the industry with Michigan medical marijuana, that they are all stating that Michigan, as right now, has the best medical marijuana bill in the country. And the reason being that they cite is that it's agnostic. So it's not, corporate welfare for one individual. And that attempted to happen here, I guess, and, we got away from it. There was a few individuals that wanted to have all the dispensaries or the safety compliance facilities to buy their, either product or equipment direct from one individual, which is, crony capitalism. And I'm 100% against that. And so a lot of those individuals that were in the writing of this bill, forced that this had to be completely agnostic of an individual, of an industry, and take all that kind of crony capitalism out of the equation. And from what I'm understanding, that has happened. Other states do have those kinds of rules in place where somebody was able to lobby and get something in their favor. And an example you could use is like when Ohio had a recreational bill up, I think it was probably 2 years ago now, I think it was for their 2016 election maybe, that their recreational actually failed. And the reason people are citing that is that it only was going to have 3 grow houses in the entire state. And if you look up like Nick Lachey from 98 Degrees, this goofball guy who was in a boy band in the mid-90s, was one of the lobbyists for this and got it where he was going to have one of those grow houses and dispensaries that you could only get it from one individual. So that's crony capitalism at its best, where you're forced to buy from one person. There's no market competition. So in the end, the consumer gets pays high prices and gets low quality product.
If we look at Michigan law and laws from other states, do they conflict with federal law?
Actually, if you're speaking in that term, everything violates federal law right now. The Schedule 1 Act, or the Schedule 1 drug the way it is now, and the Medical Marijuana Act of 1933 or 37, I forget the year, everything is operating under, breaking the current federal law. What has changed with all of that and why the tide is turning is the something called the Cole Memo, which was put out, I think, in 2010, where one of the deputies of the Attorney General up at the federal level said, we are going to leave states alone that enact marijuana by the people. So most of the time, everything is coming up. It's not a bill that the government is passing for us. This is all, people-driven event here. So we are having on the ballot. It's passing overwhelmingly in all these states. And so they've said we're going to go after individuals where, they're growing on federal land, and they gave us kind of a bullet point list in that Cole memo of things that they're going to continue to do. But if you are operating under the state's mandated guidelines that they put out, we will not go after that. And the interesting thing now is we have a new Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, and he is salivating at going after these medical marijuana, recreational marijuana states, but he is barred from using any federal money to do so because of this Cole memo. So that's basically what is, has that kind of floodgate dam built up there, so Jeff Sessions is unable to go after that. The other nice thing about it is he's trying to change that Cole memo, but the House of Representatives is blocking him at every turn because they believe the people have spoken, and we need to let it lie. The other part of that is how you believe the Constitution should be interpreted. We have the 10th Amendment, which is nullification of the states that can nullify a federal law. The states are the ones that make up the United States, not the other way around. The Supremacy Clause is what people use to combat that argument, but that's not even the correct interpretation of that law. So the 10th Amendment nullification is another form of those, that way that states are now defying federal law and enacting, whichever medical or recreational marijuana.
Let's segue for a minute. I know I asked you to talk to me about medical marijuana, but let's talk about legal marijuana or recreational marijuana just for a couple of minutes.
Sure.
When I have these conversations, and I had this conversation, frankly, last week with somebody, a professional therapist, who told me that medical marijuana is really part of an overall agenda as a step toward all of these places want legal recreational marijuana. And sort of the implication in that is that medical marijuana really is a way to get people used to it, and then they're going to come in and all of a sudden recreational marijuana is legal everywhere. And there was just in the way that was sort of described to me, there was, sort of a very conspiratorial tone in that. How would you respond to people who might try to make that argument?
And in that kind of a frame of the discussion, I would probably see that is, maybe an end game for some individuals to have recreational marijuana. But okay, so let's test it on the people that truly, really do need it, as opposed to just some guy that just wants to, smoke a joint, let's say. And those individuals are getting help. Their quality of life is increased, and in recreational and in medicinal states, opiate use is down by up to 25% in each of those states. And that's something that is huge in the country right now. We're talking about an opiate epidemic. And so, when Vicodin really kind of came on the scene in the early 90s, doctors weren't sure of the long-term effects of it, so they were passing that stuff out like candy. I would say that in my personal experience, my mother had a serious back injury back then in 1990 and forced her to retire. She used to work at a psych hospital down in Northville. And so she had to take a medical retirement because her back, they literally crushed 4 discs in her back from getting jumped at work by all the mental patients. And so she was on the cusp of that. And, so she was, right into the Vicodin, era where people were getting them and, they would take them and they'd pass out for 4 or 5 hours because they can't keep it awake. And then they have all those addictive qualities. And then you talk about Norco and all these other opiates that are literally, cocaine or heroin without the high. It's in our societies now, and opiate is huge. And even, it's kind of funny, I just read an article the other day that even Dr. Oz, the TV guy, is now saying that marijuana is not a gateway drug, but an exit drug to get people off of opiates and back into normal life. And if you talk to most of the people that are in the medical marijuana community, that they, are getting individuals who are off of those drugs. The guys that have the serious back injuries or chronic pain all the time, that they're addicted to these Percocet patches and those kinds of things, and they got on medical marijuana to get away from that because they did not like how they felt. Their families didn't like how they acted. But, on medical marijuana, it's a totally different scenario where, you're only getting the help when you need it, and, the rest of the day you can function like a normal human being.
I think that's something that even opponents of medical marijuana can get behind. The idea that for pain management, that medical marijuana may be a better alternative than opioids. That's a whole other, that opioid crisis is, we're seeing that everywhere we look. We're attempting to get some people for a future podcast to talk about the opioids, because it's just a conversation that needs to happen. But that's going to have to be another day. But the recreational marijuana.
Just to touch on that real quick.
Yeah.
Just as an experience, I was doing something for the village called Hope, Not Handcuffs, and that's where we could have individuals that are drug addicts in any form come into the police department and surrender themselves and say, I need some help. And they're not going to be put in handcuffs. They're actually going to get called from an angel that works for Hope Not Handcuffs and get them into a treatment center. And what started at is this whole opioid epidemic. And, police officers that we're talking to, everybody has Narcan in their police cars now, in their cruisers. And they administer it. When I was down in Ferndale discussing with those guys about what happens, there was a officer that said, I Narcaned a guy 3 times in 24 hours. And when you use this Narcan on them, they are literally overdosing and near death, and this is what's supposed to bring them back. And we have this as a normal day job for our officers. So to say that the opioid epidemic doesn't exist, I call any of those individuals a liar.
It's I'm familiar with Hope Not Handcuffs. Just recently I went to a luncheon that was down in Troy, Michigan. For those of you listening elsewhere, Troy, Michigan is just outside of Detroit, sort of in that general area, southeast Michigan. But I went to a luncheon, and one of the panelists was Judge Davis from the 41st District Court in Macomb County, and she talked about Hope Not Handcuffs. And I reached out to them and actually have been talking to them a little bit about us getting involved to do some work with them. So I think, it's a great program, and it's something that we would be really happy to support. And so hopefully
it's all volunteer too. It's all individuals, and that people who either were addicts themselves, family members who have lost someone who was an addict. And this is the way I feel we should be going. We should be talking about, drug addiction is a substance abuse treatment, not necessarily a criminal treatment. So we're locking up individuals who just have an addictive personality and they got hooked on the wrong thing. And we're locking them up and ruining their lives over something they need help from, not to be put in a cage. And that's why I brought it to Holly. That was huge. I could not be happier that I got that program implemented in Holly.
Yeah, good for you. Good for you. Let's circle back to
sure.
As I said, this is a future, definitely a future podcast topic, and I may be calling on you now to talk in another podcast about that issue. So stay tuned for that phone call.
Absolutely. No, I'm open. Anything.
But the recreational marijuana.
Sure. I do believe that's an end game. I have no doubt. Michigan right now, the way it's looking is we will have a recreational marijuana bill on the ballot in 2018 for the people to decide. There's 2 groups out now that are gathering signatures. One is called Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol, and the secondary one is called MI Legalize. Both of those groups are working together, and they've surpassed the 200,000 signatures just a few weeks ago from an update I got from them. And I think they're going for over 300,000 just to make sure that if any are thrown out, we're no big deal. But I think they only require 275,000. But they are super close. I have zero doubt in my mind it will be on the 2018 ballot.
Give me an argument for legal recreational marijuana and a legitimate argument against.
Well, I guess I could go back to the same thing. It's none of my business what do you do in your house on your own time. That's, a victimless crime is someone that simply has possession of it and they're taken to jail for it. I think that's morally wrong. I'm a big opponent of, there must be a victim in order for there to be a crime. It goes along the same lines that I alluded to earlier about, New York and the soda bans. And then, individuals that want to make their own choices, they should be able to make those choices, but also suffer the consequences of those choices personally. But then an argument against, I really think we should figure out the idea of how we can, test individuals that are driving, under the influence and that kind of thing. I don't think it should be in public places. I don't want to be at a park and smell it when I'm playing with my kids, public spaces. But when you look at the places that already have the recreational marijuana. They definitely, there's not a huge widespread complaint. People understand. And I think it's more like alcohol. We all have it in our homes if we drink. We teach our kids from an early age, this is not for you. This is something, we hide it away. It's up in a high cupboard so nobody can reach it. Some of us lock it up in something that the kids can't have access to. But it's a conversation in the household that goes on that we discuss it. Say, hey, when you're an adult, you can make a free choice. And if you choose to drink, you have that personal choice. If you choose not to, great, no problem there either. But I feel like we're kind of moving the conversation that way.
I want to reiterate here. I very much appreciate the knowledge and the homework and the research you've done. This has been great. Let me, at the risk of overstepping here, can I have you maybe give out some contact information if people either here within the state of Michigan, our home state, or people who may have an interest in this outside of the state of Michigan? Is there a way that they could ask you questions or make some comments about everything that you said, or just kind of communicate with you about this issue? Do you have a way they can do that?
Sure. I have a council Facebook page, so you could probably go in and look for Dave Cruickshank Holly Village Council is a way to search me. Or if you bring up the village website and go to the council page, my email is listed in there. They could email me that way. And then I could even send you my personal email that you could put in like a hyperlink on a notes page if you're interested in that.
Well, that would be up to you. If you're willing to give that out, that's fine. But I think the through the Facebook page, I think I've communicated with you through that. The village website's a great idea.
I'm pretty active in there. That's one of the things I've wanted to do is just outreach to the community. There hasn't been too many council members that do those kinds of things, and that's who I am. That's my political basis, is just interaction and making sure and educating the public and also taking the input.
I really want to thank you, Dave. I think the people that listen to this are going to learn an awful lot, and they may not agree with everything that you've said, but they're going to learn something from it for sure.
It's logical discussions. I mean, I understand the whole stigma behind it, and if you would have said 10 years ago, I probably would have said no, we don't need to go any further with marijuana just because I have the old stigma. But in looking at it and then talking with individuals, and like I said, when I started doing some of this research and reaching out, a lot of people came to me and said, hey, you know what, I'm a medical user, I have a card, or hey, I'm a recreational user, or hey, I'm a business owner and I'm involved. We definitely want to dispel those myths, but in reality, usage has not changed in any of those states that have recreational marijuana even, and it's actually trending down. So it's down, like 1 or 2%, so that's kind of in that margin of error. But decidedly, Colorado and Oregon and all those individuals, they've done studies and they update them literally every year. And youth usage and youth perception has been unchanged since those bills have passed there. And I'm trying to give that information to the people, but it's really hard to change those preconceived notions. I certainly understand that I'm one that I'll change my idea based on facts presented to me. And, sadly, some people are divisive enough for that. Their beliefs are their beliefs, and no matter what you say, they're going to hold those beliefs.
Well, I tell you, as long as it's an informed belief, I guess. I mean, that what I'm interested in and what's important to me is that people have the facts, and then they can make a decision based on that. And I think there's a lot of times these opinions are based on, as I said, old mythology and stereotypes, and not necessarily facts. And what you've done for us today is provided some facts, and that's going to help people make a more informed decision. So I want to thank you again. I've kept you on here longer than maybe you wanted to, but this has been a great conversation for me.
Pleasure.
And I appreciate it.
Certainly my pleasure. I appreciate you having me on, Jim. I definitely do. I'm always open to talking in any topic. I'm one of those guys that, no topic is unturned in my mind.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the ADE Spotlight podcast. If you would like to be a guest on one of our podcasts, or if you have an idea for a topic you'd like us to cover, please feel free to drop us a line. We'd love to hear your suggestions. If you haven't done so already, I encourage you to check out ADE Solutions, a new website from ADE. There you will find a variety of quizzes and assessments covering a whole range of behavioral health related topics, including substance use, gambling, mental health disorders, eating disorders, and the like. If you have concerns about yourself or a loved one in these areas, please access the website and check out the assessments. Or if you simply want to expand your knowledge on these topics, on the education tab on that website, we have a variety of quizzes as well as other podcasts similar to the one that you just listened to. You can find that at www.ade.solutions, or you can link to it from our corporate website, www.adeincorp.com.